Chapter 20. The New Order. The storm broke when Bellatrix arrived at Azkaban. The prison resonated with the sound of the ocean, its relentless waves creating a hush that echoed through the shadowy hallways. Even hundreds of miles away, she could still hear the ocean crashing against the rocks. Many of her fellow prisoners had tried to shatter themselves on those very rocks, seeking the freedom that death promised, but not Bellatrix. In her darkest moments, she clung to the hope that the Dark Lord would rise again. What about the new prisoners? She demanded of a Dementor drifting near a nearby cell. The creature turned toward her, enveloping her in a wash of cold, yet, after years of enduring that icy emptiness, she didn't flinch. The Dementor guided her to the uppermost floor, where Podmore awaited. "Leave us," Bella commanded. The creature floated away, but not before drawing in a deep, rattling breath of her excitement. She felt a thrill course through her as her fingers danced over her wand. Podmore lay curled in the corner, a half-blood scum who had caused significant trouble with his obliviation. He was still smeared with ash, his broad face wearing an expression of defiance. Bella relished the thought of watching that defiance fade. "I don't know anything," he croaked. Legilimens, Bella hissed. Podmore's mind surged over her, a cacophony of memories and thoughts, his pathetic worries about his mudblood friends. The fear that his parents, his mother a mudblood herself, had been killed. Soon enough, she found stability within his memories, treading water, able to navigate through the chaos. She summoned images of the Malfoys, and they flowed through her like cold currents, snippets of conversations passing by like whispers of ghosts. "Have you seen Lucius Malfoy stalking around the place?" Podmore had laughed 6 years ago to a fellow obliviator. "I've just got the slime off my robes." And there was Podmore. The previous year, during my rehiring appointment, I found myself placed under the Imperious Curse. It was Lucius Malfoy, a notorious Death Eater, as Bella clawed through his memories. Relishing the way he jerked against the stone floor, she stumbled upon conversations from just 3 weeks prior. Podmore had been discussing the Malfoys' deaths with his friends. A surge of triumph coursed through her. She lifted her wand and broke the connection, breathing heavily. If Podmore had been unaware of the Malfoys' treachery, he wouldn't have erased their existence from the minds of others. Leaving him curled and quivering on the floor, Bella strode down the hallway, a smile playing on her lips. She had already taken pleasure in using the Cruciatus curse on both Weasley parents, but their pompous son, Percy, remained untouched. It was clear he had only turned traitor out of a panicked, childish loyalty to his parents, yet, she mused, he would have his uses, just like all pawns do. Soon, she found the Weasley parents bound and gagged in the corner of a damp cell. At her feet lay the young man, who made a tiny, stifled sound. "Oh, are we frightened?" she asked, a wide smile spreading across her face as she stooped beside him. She had immobilized him with one of her favorite curses, not quite a full body bind. She relished the twitching, the muffled sounds escaping between clenched teeth. It was proof of her power. She locked eyes with the young Weasley, whose blue gaze was clouded with sheer terror. He wore horn-rimmed glasses, one lens cracked and the frame twisted. Bella took delight in his recoil. Muffled yells came from the parents, their voices muted by their gags. She glanced up at them, having conjured posts to which they were bound. No matter how they struggled against their restraints, they would remain trapped. Even in this state, reduced as they should be, she found them repulsive, the waste of it all. Sometimes, she wanted to howl at the sheer waste, the pride they could have taken in a line of pure blood as ancient as her own, yet here they were, wallowing in the filth with muggles. "This need not be painful," Bella said, her voice low but commanding. Instantly, their pitiful sounds ceased. "I know that you know what I seek," she continued, her gaze piercing. "I know you remember information about the Malfoys." The Weasleys stiffened, and it was practically a confession. Bella rose to her feet, her presence demanding attention. "I wish," she whispered, "to speak with my traitorous sister and her treacherous worm of a husband." She circled the room, her movements graceful yet menacing. With a flick of her wand, she vanished the gags from their mouths, but they remained too stunned to respond. Anger coursed through Bella now. Back in the graveyard, She had struggled with every ounce of restraint to keep from obliterating the Malfoy's tomb. If only she could kill them herself and slip their bodies into their coffins. The Dark Lord would never know she was linked to 3 more blood traitors of the foulest kind. Bella, she heard faintly, echoing in her sister's smooth voice. A jolt of fury surged through her. She had trusted Sissy completely, and it felt like heartbreak to lose her this way, especially after believing Narcissa had met a noble end. She recalled Sissy's unbreakable vow, made behind the Dark Lord's back. She should have known better. Bella swallowed the bitter taste rising in her throat and forced a smile. It has been far too long since I spoke to my nephew. Surely, you wouldn't deny me that opportunity? The Weasleys remained silent, fully aware of the fate that awaited the Malfoys at her hands. But this was the game for Bella. She could have easily used legilimency, of course, but where was the thrill in that? Without a hint of resistance, she let out a derisive laugh. Surely, you haven't grown fond of the Malfoys? Did my brother-in-law not try to slaughter 2 of your own? Bella's smile widened into a fierce grin, almost a baring of teeth. And you must know that I value the life of this filth. She circled back and kicked Percy's body hard, eliciting cries from his parents. Just as little. Why not just watch him die? Turning her gaze to Molly and Arthur, Bella let her smile fade. So, she whispered, why begrudge me my family reunion in times like these? We must cling to family. Mustn't we? Or do you need a reminder? With a sudden movement, she whirled toward Percy, wand raised. No. Molly's scream echoed in the cell. Bella froze, wand still poised. Arthur's face twitched with a mix of guilty relief and horror, his mouth falling open in shock. Molly slumped against the post, surrendering her weight to the ropes that bound her. As their eyes locked, Arthur gave a tiny, helpless nod. Half-hold H-Hill, Molly gasped, regaining her composure enough to push herself upright against the post. Her eyes burned into Bella, filled with loathing. On Sunday, at 8 a.m., you'll find Lucius and Narcissa there. Bella lowered her wand. A sense of satisfaction washing over her. The woman would be a fool to lie, knowing Bella could always return to make good on her threat. And Draco? We can't say where he's gone, Arthur replied through gritted teeth. It's protected by the Fidelius charm. He may meet them on the hill on Sunday. That's all we know. Bella contemplated this. It was true that, even with legilimency, she couldn't uncover a secret protected by the Fidelius charm unless she was probing the mind of the secret keeper themselves. Of course, the Death Eaters were all too aware of where the Order of the Phoenix had hidden their base. The Potter cottage had vanished months ago, and the taboo on the Dark Lord's name continued to trigger alarms in that area. Potter himself, that sentimental fool, had been far too careless. Draco had obviously claimed it for himself. He was surely there, alongside the Mudblood and Potter, but Bella was confident she could snatch him at the meeting on Sunday. Curling her lip in disdain at the Weasleys, she remarked, so obliging. The Dark Lord will thank you for your service. With a graceful flick of her wand, she tucked a dark lock of hair behind her ear as she glided toward the exit. Pausing at the door for a moment, she seemed to remember something and turned back to Percy. But if you've lied, she said, her voice dripping with malice, I have a little test in store for you. Bella knew they hadn't lied. But the thrill of seeing the horror wash over their faces as they realized what was about to happen was sweeter than any wine. Percy, Molly gasped. Percy, no, please. Arthur cried out, his son's wide eyes locked onto his. Bella aimed her wand at the boy's throat and uttered, Crucio. The screams that erupted mingled with her laughter, filling the air with a chilling symphony. The Dark Lord would have cautioned her to exercise restraint, but Bella could easily envision the approving smile on his thin lips. As Christmas and Boxing Day passed in a blur, there was so much to do that Hermione struggled to keep track of it all. So much to do that she, Harry, and Draco hadn't yet found a way to destroy the Horcrux. One night, they attempted to take the sword to it in Harry's room, but a protective enchantment surrounded the locket, as if the air around it were made of hard rubber, preventing anything from touching it except human skin. Try opening it, Harry suggested, but when Hermione attempted to pry it open, Just like in their 5th year, it wouldn't budge. Thrilling, Draco remarked dryly. I don't suppose Dumbledore warned you about this, Potter? Harry sighed. No. They all exchanged weary looks, too exhausted to speak. I'll research it tomorrow, Hermione said with a yawn, and they locked the door behind them, the weight of their task hanging heavily in the air. Hermione tucked the Horcrux back into Harry's bedside table and made her way to bed. She couldn't help but notice how much better she had slept over the past few nights, wrapped in Draco's arms, than she had in the previous 6 months combined. Unfortunately, none of them had managed to find time to research the Horcrux yet. It felt as if they were battling a hydra of logistical challenges. The moment they resolved one issue, like figuring out how to feed all the residents at headquarters or finishing a potion to strengthen Ollivander, 2 more would emerge. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was an invigorating sense of purpose. It reminded her of the time spent at the Burrow before the Ministry fell, although back then, she had been preparing for a million uncertainties. Now, everything felt more concrete. Dumbledore's murder and the sacrifices made at Malfoy Manor were undeniably terrible, yet they were known quantities. Armed with the knowledge of what they faced and with the Order reforming in opposition, Hermione felt as if her feet had solidified beneath her. The first official meeting of the new Order was scheduled for Saturday evening. That afternoon, Hermione gathered 5 others to help her cast a temporary extension charm on the front room. It just isn't big enough for everyone who's supposed to come, she said, squinting down the length of her wand at the room's left corner. Ginny grinned. You mean it isn't big enough for Hagrid? Exactly. On 3, then. 1, 2. Difficia protractum. Together, 6 voices chanted the incantation, and the house creaked as if awakening from a long slumber. The cottage walls stretched like putty, adding 7 or 8 feet to the dimensions of the front room. The ceiling arched high enough overhead that even Hagrid wouldn't have to duck. That should do the trick, Hermione said as they lowered their wands. We'll need to conjure some extra seats, too. Fred, Luna, could you handle that, please? We need enough for 13 of us, Hermione instructed, glancing around at her friends. And Luna, make sure to reinforce Hagrid's tent. Bill, if you could check that our warming charms cover the new square footage. That would be a huge help. And Ginny, Harry asked for your assistance in the garden. Apparently, one of the tents has sprung a leak. As the others turned to their tasks, Hermione noticed Draco leaning in the doorway, watching her with an amused expression. Over the past few days, she had caught him observing her as she directed and delegated, a cat-like satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. What? She asked, approaching him with a smile. Oh, nothing, he replied with a casual shrug. You should consider management, that's all. Management? Hermione raised an eyebrow. I'm saying you've got a talent for ordering people around, Granger, organizing things, he said, gesturing toward the chart she had hung by the hearth. She had charmed it to delegate tasks like grocery shopping, cleaning, and meal preparation. The name Fred Weasley danced just out of reach of Draco's fingertip. Hermione laughed. Oh, this is nowhere near what I did before OWLS. It's nothing. It's not nothing, Draco countered. Why do you think the Ministry was always such a mess, even before all this? Mismanagement. My parents used to talk about it all the time. A brief silence fell between them. They hadn't discussed his parents' arrival since Christmas, when they had informed the rest of the Order that Lucius and Narcissa would be arriving at headquarters on Sunday morning. The news had been met with a predictably chilly reception. It seemed they were both looking for a distraction from that topic, as Draco continued on as if he hadn't mentioned them at all. No organization, he said disdainfully, no confidence in half the department heads. Whereas, his gaze swept over the lively front room, where Luna had now enlisted both Fred and George to help reinforce an armchair the size of a small sedan. Everyone here actually likes doing what you tell them to do. He turned back to her, his expression earnest. They trust you, Granger. That's not nothing, Hermione replied with a smile. I hadn't realized I'd signed up for a careers advice appointment, she added, making an effort not to reveal just how flattered she truly felt. Draco never offered empty compliments. He was serious about this, envisioning her as a department head at the Ministry. For a fleeting moment, Hermione allowed herself to picture it, sitting in an office with a large, meticulously organized desk, leading a team of like-minded individuals. But she quickly shook off the thought. Even if the world returned to normal and she began considering career prospects, dreaming about titles and leadership felt misguided. She didn't want her future to be defined by a list of positions she'd held. She wanted to make a real difference, to mend what was broken. Anyway, she said, shuffling her notes for the meeting, I'm not particularly interested in management. I want to do some good in the world. Draco raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. You do realize that would be infinitely easier from the top down? She crossed her arms defiantly. Actually, the only way to drive real change is from the bottom up. He opened his mouth to respond, but their discussion was abruptly interrupted by a crack. Professor McGonagall had arrived for the meeting, punctual as always, followed closely by Hagrid, who appeared moments later with a portkey. A great shout of delight erupted at their entrance, and Harry, just returning from the garden with rosy cheeks from the cold, dashed across the room to hug Hagrid. Harry! Hagrid bellowed, lifting him up so high and so tightly that Harry's foot nearly knocked one of the pictures off the mantel. Yerry's safe. Look at all this. Lily and James's place. Hagrid sniffed loudly, his eyes glistening, just like I remember it. And Hermione. Setting Harry down, he bent to wrap his arms around Hermione's midriff. She embraced him tightly, and he returned the gesture with a bone-crushing hug, still sniffling above her. Meanwhile, Fawn, the boarhound, had made a beeline for Draco, who quickly scrambled onto the sofa, but it didn't save him. The massive black dog bounded toward him, ready for a reunion of his own. Up onto him, showering his face with slobber, Hagrid's expression shifted as he noticed Draco. That gets still with you? He muttered to Hermione, hasn't given you any trouble. Has he? No, she replied quickly, not at all. He's been a real help, he's been. Hagrid looked puzzled, but his attention was drawn away when Luna asked Professor McGonagall, Are you here to stay, Professor? Given the sizable rucksack slung over McGonagall's back, it certainly seemed that way. The Transfiguration professor gave a curt nod, seemingly unable to articulate the reality of her departure from Hogwarts. You had to leave, Professor, Harry said, his gaze steely. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley knew we'd contacted you before their memories were modified. The Death Eaters would have locked you up in Azkaban the moment they found out you had a way of reaching us. Professor McGonagall sighed but nodded in agreement. I've left a list of nominations for my replacement with the headmaster, she said, unable to hide her distaste. I highly doubt he'll consider any of my suggestions, but perhaps his master's agenda is keeping him busy enough that he'll want to rehire someone as quickly and quietly as possible. What about you, Hagrid? Fred chimed in, moving in. Are you? Yeah, what's that? George added, pointing at the enormous sack on Hagrid's back. My tent, of course, Hagrid replied, looking taken aback. Aberforth said we'd need them. Speaking of whom, Hermione said, glancing at her watch, he should. Just then, as if on cue, a crack echoed through the room as two more figures appeared by the hearth. One was tall and burly, with stringy, wire-gray hair. Behind his spectacles, his piercing blue eyes surveyed the scene. Clutching Aberforth Dumbledore's left hand was a small, familiar figure, Harry Potter. Yelped Dobby the house elf, launching himself forward to tackle Harry's thigh. His bat-like ears flopped excitedly as he clung on. The ears of the elves flapped excitedly. We elves have been hearing stories all year, Harry Potter, all year. Soon, they were all talking over one another, an animated chatter with Fleur speaking to Hagrid, Aberforth grunting a reply to Bill, and the younger Weasleys bombarding Professor McGonagall with questions. Hermione's gaze drifted to Draco, who remained pinned beneath Fong on the sofa. Her smile faded as she noticed Draco's gaze fixed on Dobby. He looked very pale. Hesitating for a moment, she turned to Harry and asked, Did you ask Aberforth to bring Dobby? Yeah, Harry replied, grinning. I thought it'd be useful to have someone who can apparate in and out of Hogwarts, wouldn't it? George suddenly went still beside Hermione. Hang on, he breathed, realization dawning. Elves can apparate in and out of Hogwarts. Does that mean they can do the same from Azkaban? I wish it did, Hermione said, a hint of regret in her voice, but the prison has housed elves and other magical beings before. It's cloaked against all sorts of magic for that reason. She pursed her lips, adding, and I must say, it's quite telling that the only time wizards consider elf magic is when they're imprisoning elves for crimes that wizards almost certainly coerce them into committing. Fred and George didn't seem to register her last comment. George's expression fell, prompting Fred to give him a reassuring pat on the back. I suppose if house elves could get in there, Fred mused, any wealthy pureblood with half a brain could break out, just call for them, and up they'd pop. Everyone, Harry tried to interject from Hermione's other side. Sonorous, Hermione said, pointing her wand at him. He nodded his thanks before raising his voice to fill the expansive front room. Everyone. A hush fell over the crowd. Thanks, Harry continued. Now that we're all here, I reckon we should start the meeting. Here, called the Weasley twins in unison. There should be enough seats for everyone, Hermione said quickly. Hagrid, that armchair is reinforced just for you. She smoothed her itinerary over her notes as she and Harry settled onto the sofa beside Draco, who had finally been freed from Fawn. The dog trotted across the room, happily drooling on Ginny's shoes. A hush fell over the group, the only sound coming from the crackling fire in the hearth. The winter sun had set hours ago, and the firelight danced on the glazed window panes, where snow had accumulated in soft, white-blue curves. All right, Harry began. First off, thank you all for being here. He paused, looking at the dozen members of the new order gathered before him, struggling to find the right words. Right brave of us. Fred chimed in. Heroic, George added with a grin, orders of Merlin all around. A few chuckles rippled through the room, but the mood settled quickly. In my 4th year, Harry continued, right after Voldemort's return, Dumbledore had a strategy for how to fight back. Aberforth let out a low rumble from his armchair, but remained silent. Not all of it worked, Harry admitted, but now that we know what we're up against, we have to do the same thing. We've come up with a list of ideas for how to fight back. He glanced at Hermione. Yes, I have it right here, she said, holding up the itinerary. Obviously, it'll be difficult and dangerous, so we'd like anyone who has ideas to speak up too. There was a moment of silence. With a wistful pang, she recalled the first meeting of the DA. Clearing her throat, she pressed on, first things first, then. For months, years, really, the Daily Prophet has been printing horrible lies about Harry, Draco, and I have seen firsthand the pamphlets about Muggleborns that they're distributing at the Ministry, and we've heard those awful reports on the wireless as well. Until this month, people could turn to the Quibbler for the real story. She nodded to Luna, who sat up a little straighter. Pride, Harry began, but with Luna's father in danger, he won't be able to do that anymore. So, he continued, we need to find a way to get the truth out there. People have to know what really happened at Malfoy Manor, and that we're not. That Harry didn't kill Dumbledore, Hermione interjected fiercely, and that Voldemort isn't some freedom fighter for wizard kind. Bill shook back his long hair. You mean a reinformation campaign? Exactly, Hermione replied, but how should we go about it? Luna asked, sitting cross-legged in her chair, her curiosity piqued. Well, Harry said, we were hoping you could take charge of it, Luna. It seems like you've learned a lot from your dad. Luna's eyes widened with excitement. Ooh, yes, I'd love to help. George half raised his hand. Sorry, but do we have a spare printing press lying around that I haven't seen? It wouldn't be a full magazine, Hermione clarified. We were thinking of leaflets, short, simple sheets that would be easy to disguise, replicate, distribute, and dispose of once someone's done reading them. I dare say you know, Miss Granger, Professor McGonagall interjected, that replicating on a grand scale, in orders of magnitude greater than 7, tends toward degradation. Hermione nodded and quickly grabbed a book from the coffee table, of course. I've been reading all about structural disintegration by transfigurative derivatives to prepare. Ginny cleared her throat. Let's say, just in theory, that some of us hadn't been reading about structural disintegration by transfigurative derivatives. Yeah, Harry said, unable to suppress a grin. What would that mean, then? Hermione replaced the book. All it means is that if we duplicate an object enough times, or its duplicates, the results will be less accurate copies of the original. So, it might be feasible for us to create 100 leaflets and multiply them to 700, but duplicating just one leaflet 700 times would produce hundreds of useless scraps of paper. There are potions and certain curses that can bypass these effects, but they're all quite time-consuming and resource-intensive, and well, I doubt anyone here has 3 whole Aggleback pelts lying around. Just the 2, Fred sighed. George shook his head in mock sorrow. Always 1 Aggleback pelt short, aren't we, Fred? Ginny snorted, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes. We'll need loads of ink and parchment, then, actually, the DA was doing something similar last fall at Hogwarts. She exchanged a smile with Luna, Neville, and I were gathering any information we could from the outside, sneaking out at night to post newsletters around the school. Were you, Miss Weasley? Professor McGonagall asked, her nostrils flaring. Ginny grinned, unfazed, while Luna nodded along, completely unaware of Professor McGonagall's displeasure. We're both quite skilled at simultaneous cool charming now. Luna said earnestly, I think we could produce a lot of leaflets very quickly, if we had enough materials. But distribution is another challenge, Bill said, tugging at his earring with a grimace. The Quibbler was available by owl order only, and we don't even have a single owl among us. What? No owl? Hagrid exclaimed, indignant. Just a moment. He began rummaging through his heavy overcoat, pulling out pocket after pocket filled with dog biscuits and a handful of nuts. Moments later, he revealed a ruffled live owl perched in his palm. Cheers, Fred said, amusement dancing in his eyes. But Scruffy here isn't exactly going to give us profit levels of circulation. Is he? Mail subscriptions aren't the only way to get the truth to your readers, Luna chimed in, her excitement rising. When Daddy was just starting the Quibbler, he would leave stacks of free copies outside Flourish and Blots for everyone. None of you, Professor McGonagall interrupted, her tone firm. Risk, he said sharply, we won't be going anywhere near Diagon Alley. Dobby puffed out his tiny, scrawny chest, his scarf tied around him like a sash. Dobby would be honored to leave messages in Diagon Alley for the Order of the Phoenix. Dobby would risk life and limb to no, Dobby, thanks, Harry interrupted quickly. Professor McGonagall's right, we need to keep everyone here safe. A muscle twitched in his jaw. We've already had too many people caught. How about flyovers? Ginny suggested, we could drop the leaflets from brooms into Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade. Maybe even at the entrance to the Ministry. There was a brief, thoughtful pause. That'll only work once, Draco pointed out. As all eyes turned to him, Hermione noticed a glaze hardening over his features, like a protective veneer. And why's that, Malfoy? Hagrid asked, his distrust barely concealed. Draco met Hagrid's gaze without flinching, his expression colder than usual. Hermione hoped he wouldn't lash out. She understood the discomfort he must be feeling, but if he acted the way the Order expected, they'd never see him differently. Once they know we're doing this flyover idea, Draco said, his voice clipped but, to Hermione's relief, steady, they'll station aerial guards in those locations. So, it'll only work once. Yes, that's probably true, Hermione agreed, trying to sound casual. Draco just needed to adjust to this situation, she told herself. Soon enough, it would be like it used to be, just the 3 of them. The others simply needed to see that more relaxed side of him. But for now, he seemed hesitant to let that side show. Just one flyover could be useful, though, Harry mused, still looking at Ginny. A load of leaflets as a big first push, ensuring that people know to be vigilant in the future. Fred and George exchanged murmurs between themselves. Hermione cleared her throat to get their attention. Fred, George, do you have something to add? They both broke into matching grins. Yeah, Fred replied, we've got an idea. We were developing something with Lee during our 7th year, George continued, a joke broadcast on the Wizarding Wireless. Unfortunately, it never got off the ground, Fred chimed in, thanks to one Dolores Jane Umbridge. But the core concept still stands, George said. We believe we can set up a secret frequency on the wireless that requires a password to access. And ours can broadcast the real news, Fred added, not the rubbish the ministry is putting out. That's brilliant. Harry exclaimed, shifting to the edge of the sofa cushion, we can update the entire country on what we know. The house has an attic you can use. Great. The twins chorused in unison. Hermione was already scribbling down notes. So, Fred and George, you two will set up this broadcast, and Ginny, you'll collaborate with Luna on the leaflets. We can discuss the logistics as we go along. 4 heads nodded in agreement. What's next? Harry asked in a lowered voice. Numbers, Hermione replied, tapping the itinerary in front of her. Harry nodded and addressed the group again. Listen, there may only be a dozen of us here, but we know there are many others who support the order. For Merlin's sake, every Muggleborn is either on the run, hiding, or being targeted by the ministry. That's got to be thousands of people across the country. Of course, not all of them can come to headquarters, but what if we set up additional safe houses where those on our side know they can go if they're in trouble? We're hoping, Hermione added, that those who sympathize with us can help spread the word. I've also been researching methods for unmonitored flow connections. It's been illegal for decades, but if we create an interconnected network of safe houses, we could significantly increase our numbers and make a real stand against the Death Eaters and the ministry, Hagrid said thoughtfully. That's an idea, but I can't see how we'd go about finding people. Professor McGonagall nodded in agreement. I'm afraid Hagrid is right. Establishing new safe houses is certainly achievable. I've assisted Professor Flitwick in recasting Hogwarts' protective enchantments for years, she added, a note of pride in her voice. However, those who have gone into hiding will have done so by any means necessary. I trust you all know about the Snatchers. The what? Harry asked, confusion etched on his face. Snatchers, Bill replied grimly. They're bounty hunters working for the Death Eaters. They get rewarded for turning in Muggleborns on the run, truants from Hogwarts, anyone who's faked their family tree, things like that. They've been roaming the country for a few months now. Hermione felt her stomach drop. She glanced at Draco, then at Harry, and realized they were all thinking the same thing. Truants from Hogwarts, Ron. And, what do they do with truants? Hermione asked, her voice trembling slightly as she struggled to keep it steady. Bring them back to Hogwarts, Bill said. And then. He looked at Ginny, who shrugged. They hand them over to Snape. The Carrows rough them up a bit, but it's nothing too awful, Ginny added, but Hermione's mind was racing. The first time they'd checked the Marauders map for Ron had been nearly 24 hours after he'd left, if he had been captured and brought to Snape during that time. It would have given Snape ample opportunity to relocate him away from the school grounds. No, Hermione thought frantically, surely that couldn't be right. Snape would have interrogated Ron, and without any training in occlumency, Ron wouldn't have been able to conceal either the location of their headquarters or their quest for the Horcruxes from Snape. If Snape had discovered either of those secrets, Voldemort would have returned to Britain immediately. Draco was the one to break the heavy silence. Not, everyone's in hiding, he said. Yes, Hermione replied, shaking herself back to the present. Mr. Dumbledore, Aberforth, since you're the only one still out in the open. That makes you the only person who can contact Order sympathizers above ground to rally support. Support? Aberforth snorted. It's getting more dangerous out there. People won't want to declare their loyalty to you, or to my brother's saintly memory, if it means their families could be dragged from their beds at night and threatened with Azkaban, or worse. Hermione felt her cheeks flush. Suddenly, she realized how naive and presumptuous her words had sounded. Just then, Fleur chimed in, tossing her silvery hair back with confidence. They need not stand on their doorsteps and shout their support to the skies, she scoffed, surpassing Aberforth's disdain. They could send supplies or gold. Otherwise, how do we plan to pay for brooms, quills, ink, and parchment? This broadcasting equipment that we will need, in fact. She glanced around the room. How do we plan to pay for our meals, the meals for people in other safe houses when they are established? We will need gold. She looked at Hagrid and the bedraggled bird perched on his wrist, and when that owl is well again, I shall send him to my parents to ask for exactly that. Hearing the haughty, hard-to-please Fleur not only support their ideas but speak as if she assumed they would come to fruition bolstered Hermione more than she could express. Thank you, Fleur, Hermione said, feeling emboldened. You're right. We will definitely need funds. But it's more than that, Harry interjected, his gaze fixed intently on Aberforth. People need to know that we're willing to stand up and fight Voldemort. That way, if they want to do the same, they'll know they're not alone when the time comes. Aberforth's expression remained unreadable. He looked energized, but his expression betrayed exhaustion and reluctance. Well, he muttered, can't say I'd mind having a few more fully qualified witches and wizards to lean on. An uncomfortable silence followed. What's that supposed to mean? Ginny asked, narrowing her eyes at him. Aberforth scoffed, glancing between Ginny, Fred, and George before settling his gaze on Harry. Hermione and Draco, who were seated on the couch. It means none of you should be doing this, he replied bluntly. None of us should be, what? Hermione exclaimed, incredulous. What would my other option be? I'm a Muggle-born, it's illegal for me to return to school, in case you've forgotten, or to carry a wand. And it's your job to fix those problems, is it? Aberforth shot back, disdain dripping from his words. As if a bunch of kids could handle that. He made a disgusted sound. My brother filled your heads with these notions of carrying the world on your shoulders. Now hang on just a second, Hagrid growled, rising to the defense. Professor Dumbledore died keeping Harry safe. Aberforth let out a harsh laugh. Does Potter look safe to you now? It seems to me he's been on his own for months, barely dodging Death Eaters and the Ministry. Aberforth, Professor McGonagall interjected stiffly, we are here for precisely that reason, to ensure Mr. Potter isn't alone. Albus had, my brother, Aberforth interrupted sharply, was far too willing to let Potter stand on the front lines. Excuse me, Draco interrupted loudly, did we all gather here to discuss a dead man's questionable judgment? A heavy silence fell over the room, all eyes turned to Draco, who raised his eyebrows, his cool irritation evident. I know I'm new to the club, so maybe you all do this every time. But I thought we were here to make a plan. In the stillness, Fred let out a single snicker, easing some of the tension. Draco's right, Harry agreed. We didn't ask for this. I know we might become targets, but if we're here, we're choosing to fight. I'm not asking any of you to stay if you don't want to. Feel free to go. He shot Aberforth a fiery glance. Otherwise, let's get back to Hermione's list. We need allies. We must find those who are hiding in fear or those who secretly support us. Bill nodded thoughtfully. I can think of one place where we might find support. I don't know a single goblin who's pleased with the way things are going, either here or abroad. It's the same with my friends from Beau's Batons, Fleur added. And Victor says the same about Durmstrang. We all expect that once Voldemort has finished with wizarding Britain, he'll look across the water. We could write to Charlie, too, Bill suggested. He went back to Romania after the wedding, and I know he has friends in Hungary, Croatia, and Serbia. Are these friends dragons, by chance? Fred asked lightly. Merlin, George sighed. I'd kill to see Death Eaters duel a pack of Hungarian horntails. Hermione was taking notes so quickly that ink splattered onto her shirt. These are all great ideas, she said. Bill, Fleur, a letter-writing campaign abroad could put us ahead of the Death Eater efforts to spread propaganda in other countries. Hagrid, do you think you could reach out to Madame Maxime? Is there a chance any of the giants might help? Hagrid smoothed the owl that was waddling up the sleeve of his overcoat. Groppy could be some help with the giants, yeah. They've been quiet for a while after smashing up the coast, and I reckon that means the infighting has settled down. But tell you what, he added, looking thoughtful, the centaurs were run out of the Forbidden Forest a month ago. The Caros said something about half-breeds, and a week later, the whole herd had to leave. He shook his head in disgust. I reckon I know where they might have gone. I could try to find them and see if they've come back down to earth. I can't promise anything, but we can at least talk. Wonderful, Hermione replied, glancing over at Dobby, who was swinging his mismatched socks off the edge of his too-high seat. Dobby, do you think any of the Hogwarts house elves might feel the same way you do about the Order of the Phoenix? Would they be willing to help us? She didn't expect much. But Dobby's legs stopped swinging, and a hesitant expression spread across his face. Oh, yes, miss, he said eagerly. Really? Hermione asked, surprised. Dobby nodded earnestly. The house elves are in a terrible state. In November, Winky overheard the Caros planning, and she told us that come spring, we are expected to. He gulped, his voice trembling. We are expected to serve as cursed subjects for students' dark arts exams. Hermione felt her stomach drop as horrified silence filled the room. No, Harry croaked. Dobby, can't the elves ask the students to free them? If everyone knew this was happening. Dobby looked confused. No, Harry Potter, no. When we are before the wizards we serve. Enslaved elves are not allowed to admit we want freedom. We are meant only to serve, never to cause wizards discomfort. Most elves won't even speak among themselves about freedom, they're so unused to it. Hermione felt a sharp pain in her palms and realized she was clenching her fists so tightly that her fingernails were digging into her skin. She remembered how the Hogwarts elves had shooed her, Harry, and Ron out of the kitchens in their 4th year when she had started discussing freedom. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she recalled everything she had said, encouraging the elves to want clothes, pay, and lives of their own, in light of what Dobby had just revealed. Her earlier words felt painfully purposeless, even condescending. Of course house elves weren't allowed to admit they wanted freedom, they want to. They need the choice. Dobby's eyes sparkled with hope, but there was still a tremor in his voice. But many elves do not believe they can want anything at all, or even that they have feelings of their own. The same cruel magic that binds them also ensures that wizards remain blissfully ignorant of their plight. As Hermione scanned the room, she noticed Fred, George, and Ginny, who had always laughed off the efforts of SPW, now looking uncomfortably serious. Draco sat with his eyes closed, fingers tightly gripping the arm of the sofa. But, Dobby continued, his tone firming, we elves are talking about freedom at Hogwarts now, in secret. His expression brightened. Winky is helping me to encourage the other elves. She is beginning to see the lies and secrets of her deceased masters. Once she moves past her grief, she will understand how she was used. And so she should. Hermione exclaimed. The whole Crouch family treated her horribly. Good riddance, as far as I'm concerned. Dobby, Harry said, his voice still raspy, you and Winky are free. You can tell the students that the other elves want freedom too. Can you reach out to Neville Longbottom? Tell him what you just shared with us, and ask him to inform anyone still loyal to the D.A. that any student can free a house elf by giving them clothes. Harry Potter, Dobby replied anxiously, wringing his hands, but if only some house elves are freed, the others will still be at risk. They will certainly face punishment for what happens. Ginny interjected, Neville can organize a mass effort then, all at once, in Gryffindor Tower or in the kitchens, so they can all be freed together. Yet Dobby hesitated. Many of the house elves still wish to remain at Hogwarts. They say it is safer in the castle than outside. Hang on, Fred said, but you and Winky live in Hogwarts. Yeah, George added. They can all pretend like nothing's changed, can't they? Harry nodded. They just need to know they can run for it if they want to. Necessary. Dobby hesitated for a moment, then said with determination, Dobby will ask the Longbottom boy. And Dobby will consult the other house elves about what they are willing to do for the order. Thanks, Dobby, Harry replied. Hermione noted Dobby's involvement in her notes, although her quill wavered slightly from her indignation. Well, let's sum up, then, she said. Fred, George, Ginny, and Luna, you're in charge of rainformation. Professor McGonagall, you'll plan and enchant a new series of safe houses. Everyone else has letters to write or contacts to make, and first, we'll need a number of owls. She turned to Aberforth. We can compile a list of what we need, and Harry can deliver it to you through the mirror. Supporters can send parcels or supplies to a separate address that we can decide on later. What about you three? George asked, pointing at the sofa. What will you be up to? Hermione exchanged a glance with Draco and Harry. Harry cleared his throat. We're working on something else. What is it? Fred asked, looking puzzled. They all hesitated. Hermione didn't want to reveal that it was a task Dumbledore had assigned them, fearing it would reignite the earlier argument about Dumbledore's motives. Even worse, if they hinted that it was the key to Voldemort's defeat. The others would only demand details. She racked her brain for a lie, but she could see their curiosity intensifying. A clemency, Draco finally said. Potter started trying to learn it in 5th year. I learned last year, so I've been showing him how. Yes, Hermione added, feeling a rush of relief. Harry needs to be able to protect his mind from Voldemort. It's very important, but it's also quite private, so unfortunately, we'll need a lot of time to work on it alone. She shot Harry an apologetic look. She knew he wouldn't like being seen as a liability, but he simply nodded. The rest of the Order listened intently, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of their mission. Not pressed for more information. Their curiosity apparently satisfied, Harry called the meeting to a close, and soon after, Aberforth and Dobby disapparated. The others quickly settled into their roles. Fred and George took over the dusty old attic, while Ginny and Luna began drafting their first leaflet in the front room. Bill and Fleur assisted Hagrid and McGonagall in setting up tents in the front garden. With McGonagall's tartan tent, Fleur's delicate gray silk, and Hagrid's red and white spotted fabric, the garden at Potter Cottage was starting to resemble a peculiar patchwork quilt. Finally, Hermione slipped away with Harry and Draco into the library. Muffliato, Harry whispered, pointing his wand at the closed door. They piled their usual cushions on the floor, and as soon as they were settled, Harry spoke up. The Snatchers. Yeah, Draco replied, his tone somber. Weasley. A heavy silence fell over them. Hermione swallowed hard, but what are the chances that Ron just happened to walk into a group of Snatchers? They might have been near Ottery St. Catchpole, Harry suggested. Draco nodded in agreement. If they're any good at their jobs, they'll have outposts in any town with a sizable wizarding community. Think about it, Hermione, Harry pressed. What other reason could Ron have for not coming back? I know you thought he was hunting Hufflepuff's cup, but we have no evidence of that. Sure, Ron was angry, but he wouldn't stay away for 6 weeks. He knows how crucial the Horcruxes are. He must have been caught. But, Draco interjected, they clearly didn't know who they had. The article in the Prophet said Weasley was last seen with Spattergroit, so the Death Eaters and the Ministry still don't realize that was a hoax. Harry nodded. He must have given the Snatchers a fake identity. But if Ron pretended to be a qualified wizard on the run, Hermione countered, they would have handed him over to the Ministry. He couldn't have faked his identity during a trial, could he? So, they must have. He realized that he was of Hogwarts age and that he was skipping school. They must have sent him to Hogwarts. To Snape. A heavy silence fell over the group. When Harry finally spoke, his voice was thick with guilt and worry. Snape knows that you and Ron are my best friends. Maybe he thinks he can lure me out using Ron, or... He wouldn't need to lure you anywhere, Draco interjected. Weasley's the secret keeper, and Snape's a Legilimens. He could have come here himself as soon as he got that address out of Weasley's mind. Harry frowned, his thoughts racing. Then maybe this has something to do with the Horcruxes. Not even the Death Eaters know about them. What if Snape saw in Ron's mind that we were hunting for the Horcruxes, and... He straightened up, a new thought dawning on him. Do you think Snape knows something about Hufflepuff's cup? I don't see why that would matter, Hermione replied. If he found out we were looking for the Horcruxes, he'd summon Voldemort right away. That would be the most crucial information he could share. Harry fell silent, clearly at a loss for words. Hermione felt the same. Nothing about the situation seemed to add up. Weasley knew more than that, Draco said slowly. He knew about the Elder Wand too. Not by name, but he understood that the Dark Lord was searching for a powerful wand that Grindelwald had. We talked about it the night he left. It would have been fresh in his mind. But why would that change anything? Hermione asked, studying Draco's cautious expression. Snape is loyal to Voldemort. Surely, he'd want Voldemort to have the wand? Draco thought for a moment. Yeah, he's loyal, but he's also done things the Dark Lord doesn't know about. He made an unbreakable vow to my mother last year, that if I didn't kill Dumbledore, he would be the one to do it. And I told the Order about that, he added quickly. I told McGonagall, Hagrid. Dumbledore believed that Snape wasn't working for them. During that month at Grimmauld Place, I tried to bring it up with McGonagall countless times, but she wouldn't even listen. She thought he had somehow faked the vow. Draco shook his head, clearly annoyed. Anyway, Snape still hasn't informed the Dark Lord that my parents and I are alive, so that's another point to consider. What are you saying? Harry asked. I'm saying, Potter, that Snape isn't just a pawn of the Dark Lord. He makes his own decisions. All the Death Eaters do. None of them are completely loyal. Just look at my parents. Look at. He tugged at the left sleeve of his jumper, averting his gaze, his mouth set in a thin line. Before Hermione could think twice, she brushed her hand against his knee in a gesture of reassurance. Harry's eyes followed her movement, but he said nothing. The tension in Draco's shoulders eased slightly. Hermione refocused her thoughts on Snape. Well, she said hesitantly, we know Snape has ideas of grandeur. He did call himself the Half-Blood Prince, after all. Harry's expression darkened. And last year, during our duel, he was so proud to reveal his true identity. His disgust shifted to concern. Are we suggesting that Snape is after the Elder Wand? That he, I don't know, thinks he can outsmart Voldemort? It's possible, Hermione said, biting her lip. Of course, this is all conjecture, but Voldemort is currently abroad. As long as he's away, he's not keeping tabs on Snape. If Snape wants the Elder Wand, that could explain why he hasn't revealed our headquarters. If he did, Voldemort would return to Britain, and Snape would find himself back on a tight leash. But then Ron. Harry met Hermione's gaze, and they both grappled with the same unspoken question. If Snape had drawn such a conclusion, sensitive information regarding Ron weighed heavily on Harry's mind. How could he ultimately ensure Ron's safety? Breaking the tense silence, Draco spoke up. He's too valuable a hostage to kill. His tone was the same guarded voice he had used when discussing Luna's father, as if he understood that normal people didn't discuss hostages and torture so casually. But Hermione looked at him, desperate for a glimmer of hope, and Harry mirrored her expression. Draco continued, Snape knows you're the new leader of the Order, Potter. Weasley's your best friend and connected to half the Order's inner circle. If Snape is looking for leverage, he'd be a fool to kill him, and Snape's no fool. You're right, Hermione said after a brief pause. He's right, Harry. There's no real reason for Snape to hurt Ron, let alone to kill him. Snape will want him alive. Harry swallowed hard but nodded in agreement. As for the wand, Draco said slowly, I believe Snape would only go after it if he had a solid idea of its location. He wouldn't act recklessly. But that's troubling news, too, Harry interjected. Ron's been gone for ages. If Snape has known about the Elder Wand for this long, he might already, he might Al. His voice faltered, and he made an involuntary gesture. His eyes widened behind his glasses, his mouth agape in shock. Harry? Hermione said, alarmed, what is it? He looked from Hermione to Draco, his expression one of numb horror. The wand, he managed to choke out. We thought Grindelwald lost it sometime before dueling Dumbledore, to someone else. But what if the person he lost it to was? The pieces clicked into place for Hermione. She felt as though she had been struck. Dumbledore had the Elder Wand, Draco rasped, his gray eyes wide with disbelief. He left you the symbol in his will. The old man had it this whole time. And Snape? Hermione whispered, her voice trembling. Snape killed him, which means Snape already won the wand. They sat in silence, the weight of the statement hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The thought that Snape might wield the so-called unbeatable wand sent a chill through Hermione. Just when she had begun to feel a glimmer of hope about overcoming their challenges, this new threat loomed ominously before them. But then, a flicker of memory sparked in Hermione's mind, a shadowy movement, a piece of wood slipping from papery fingers, a tiny, hopeful flame ignited in her chest. He might not have it, she whispered. Harry and Draco turned to her, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and despair. How? Draco asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Dumbledore is buried on Hogwarts grounds. Snape could stroll out any time and, I didn't bring Dumbledore's wand back with his body, Hermione interrupted, urgency in her tone. It fell from his hand in midair when he tumbled off the thestral. We were thousands of feet up, it probably shattered on impact. There might not even be an Elder Wand anymore. Although Harry and Draco didn't look entirely reassured, a flicker of life returned to their faces. Color was creeping back into Draco's cheeks. It could be broken, he said slowly, but if it truly is such a valuable wand, it's likely been treated with resilience potions over the years. They do that with family wands, historic ones, you know. Hermione pondered this for a moment. Well, even if the wand survived the fall, how is Snape supposed to find it? It was the middle of the night, so he wouldn't have seen any landmarks, and, she added triumphantly, Mad Eye only assigned us our flying directions when we reached the Desleys. We know Dumbledore and I were headed west-northwest on that thestral, but Snape doesn't even know that much. All he knows is that we were somewhere within a 50-mile radius of number 4, Privet Drive. Still, Harry interjected, he's had 6 weeks to search for it already. A wand that can win any fight. Snape would keep looking until he found it. No matter how long it took. Then we have to find it before he does, Draco declared. Merlin knows how. Hermione froze, a spark of realization igniting within her. We already know how, she whispered. What? Draco asked, confusion etched on his face. We do? Harry echoed, his brow furrowing. A smile blossomed on Hermione's face as she pulled her beaded bag from her pocket, her fingers diving into the assortment of items collected during their months on the run. Celine she said, her voice filled with excitement. Celine. That woman from the Scavengers Guild? Draco questioned, still trying to catch up. Hermione continued to rummage through her bag. It's a spell I developed. She explained, her tone growing more animated. You start on a broom and hone in on a trace of magic. In barren areas, muggle areas, it finds a breadcrumb and leads you down the trail. Oh, Merlin's pants. Achio. From the depths of her bag, a piece of parchment flew into her waiting hand. She unfolded it, revealing the instructions written by the scavenger-in-chief with a peahen feather quill. Meanwhile, Narcissa awoke early on Sunday morning. Throughout the week, she and Lucius had debated the risks of going to Halfhold Hill. With the Weasleys imprisoned in Azkaban, they knew it was a gamble, but they also understood that the Order of the Phoenix had been in contact since the burning of the manor. If any of them had managed to send a message to Draco. If there was even the slightest chance of reuniting with him, we'll go early, she murmured to Lucius that morning, just before the Muggles prepared breakfast, we'll set protective enchantments. She had added caution upon caution until, finally, she whispered, Draco. Draco. At last, her husband nodded in agreement. Narcissa pressed her lips to his cheek, to the alabaster skin that was just beginning to regain its glow after his year in Azkaban. They arrived at Halfhold Hill an hour and a half early, ready to set the necessary protections. With a fierce intensity, the enchantments were set, the moon still high in the sky. But it wasn't early enough. They had barely reached the apex of the hill when Narcissa suddenly felt herself thrown back against the gnarled trunk of a tree, bound in place, her wand wrenched from her grip. A metallic taste filled her mouth as she struggled to reach for her wand, only to find herself completely immobilized. Always early to engagements, aren't we, sissy? A voice whispered ominously at her shoulder. As her vision cleared, she recognized the fading shimmer of Bellatrix's disillusionment charm. A surge of fear coursed through Narcissa's veins. Her sister stood before her, resplendent as ever in elegant black robes, as if she were preparing for an evening gala. Bella had always possessed striking beauty, and when she donned that dramatic pout, lowering her long lashes over her dark eyes, Narcissa could almost picture her sister as she had been at Hogwarts, the dazzling star of the Slytherin table, fiercely protective of both her and Andromeda. Such a shame, Bella remarked, twirling Lucius's wand in one hand and Narcissa's in the other. 8 o'clock isn't so far away. We'll just have to entertain ourselves while we wait for dear Draco to arrive. With a flourish, she drew her own wand, the blackthorn instrument that had brought many to their knees, glinting menacingly in the moonlight like a dagger. Bellatrix, Lucius interjected, urgency lacing his voice, no. But before he could finish, Bella had already pressed her wand against Lucius's chest. A loud bang echoed in the night, and a curse erupted from the tip of her wand, sending him into a violent spasm, twitching like a spider caught in water. Bella! Narcissa cried out in horror, Bella! She watched helplessly as Lucius writhed beside her, already a shadow of the man he once was, shamed and humiliated for far too long. Your own family! She screamed, desperation lacing her voice, family? Bella hissed, her face mere inches from Narcissa's, her dark eyes alight with a dangerous fire. Narcissa felt a hatred from Bellatrix that she had never encountered before. For the first time in her life, she saw her sister through the eyes of the world. You are no family of mine. Bellatrix spat, her voice laced with venom. You knew what this betrayal would do to me. When we lost Andromeda, I thought I had endured the worst of it. A mad, wretched sound escaped Bella, a mix of laughter and sobs, and Narcissa was transported back to a memory, Bella lying on her bed as they listened to Andromeda being expelled from their home for the last time. Bella, who had never shed a tear, who was always the strong one, had snarled, Andromeda made this choice. It was her own choice. Yet, even then, her eyes had glistened with unshed tears. You turn tail and work for the Order of the Phoenix, Bella continued, her fury unabated. You leave me as if I am nothing, and now you use family against me. We did nothing for the Order, Narcissa interrupted, her voice a harsh whisper, while Lucius trembled beside her. Use legilimency on me if you must. I am telling you the truth, Bella. Draco was convinced that the Dark Lord would kill us all for his failure. He did not trust that Severus's actions would save us. So, my son accepted Albus Dumbledore's protection for all of us, but we never advanced their cause. Your son, Bella sneered, has joined the Order. He fought alongside them at the burning of your own home. Draco has been outnumbered and surrounded for months, Narcissa snapped. Can you be certain he wasn't under the Imperious curse? Can you know that his life didn't depend on his actions at the manor? Bella hesitated, though her face remained twisted in anger, and so? So what? You admit that you accepted the protection of the Muggle lover Dumbledore. Do you feel no shame in it? The choice was not ours to make. Draco was barely of age when he trusted his life to Dumbledore. And once we were reunited with our son under Dumbledore's protection, we could hardly slink back to the Dark Lord's service. You could have tried, Bella hissed. You were with the Order, you were with Potter. You saw Potter, surely, you could have summoned the Death Eaters to him. The Dark Lord would have forgiven your failures if only you, when? Narcissa replied coldly, when were we supposed to call him to Potter? When we were trapped in a house bound by the Fidelius charm, unable to reveal its location, a month later, when we were surrounded by the Order in that hovel of the Weasleys? We would have looked like traitors, killed on sight by the Death Eaters after 4 weeks of supposed death. There would have been no time to explain ourselves in battle. Then you should have faced death. Bella spat, her anger palpable as her spittle landed on Narcissa's cheek. You should have accepted the risk to prove your loyalty. Narcissa stared at her sister, feeling a wave of despair wash over her. She had believed that when Bella agreed to cast the unbreakable vow in secret for her and Severus, it meant that Bella still valued family above all else. Had she been mistaken, and neither Lucius nor I, Narcissa whispered, "We'll invite our deaths while our son lives, Bella. We will not invite death within a mile of Draco. I had thought you felt the same way." Bella's fury trembled like a plucked string, and pain flickered across her face, her cheeks flushed with anger. "We can give the Dark Lord the boy." Lucius rasped. His body had finally stopped twitching, though his facial muscles still spasmed violently with every few words. Bella slowly turned her gaze to Lucius, her expression unreadable. "Bellatrix," he continued, a hint of his old charm breaking through, "we both know that of the two of us, you are the formidable fighter. But I am the strategist. Has it not always been this way in the Dark Lord's service? After decades of serving him side by side, you are quick to assume the worst." A muscle twitched in Bella's cheek as she processed his words. She gave a slight nod, the tension in the room hanging thick between them. With a haughty sniff, Bella retorted, "Our son vanished in July along with Potter. That Weasley brat, and that mud-blood girl. If he was seen at the manor with the mud-blood, it stands to reason he must be with Potter." "I know that," Bella snapped back, her frustration palpable. "We're aware of where the Order has set up their hideout, and yes, your son has been staying there with the worst kind of filth wizard kind has to offer. Just make your point, Lucius." Unfazed, Lucius continued, "If Draco meets us here in an hour, he can lead us to that hideout, as you say. We may be shunned and ignored, but that will grant us access to every scrap of information that pack of low-bloods and half-breeds has to offer. Draco might even have gained Potter's trust over the past several months, which would make it exceptionally easy to lure the boy out from their headquarters. Potter need only make one misstep, apparate to a vulnerable location, and Draco can help us set this trap." Narcissa averted her gaze from her husband, uncertain how much of what he said was genuine. While she understood Bella as a sister, Lucius understood Bellatrix as a lieutenant. They spoke different languages, and Narcissa could see that Lucius's plan intrigued Bellatrix. "You haven't informed the Dark Lord that we're alive, I trust," Lucius said smoothly. "I would do the same. I admit, we seem debased. Blood traitor would be too kind a term." A tiny noise escaped Bella's lips, a half-formed sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh. "But consider what would truly serve the Dark Lord," Lucius pressed, urgency creeping into his voice. "Would you really kill us and squander this opportunity, Bella? This chance to place not one, but 3 spies within the Order, together, our family can dismantle their final efforts and deliver Potter to him. When we do, our deception will be forgiven as if it were nothing. We will rise even above Severus in his esteem." Lucius paused, his gaze steady. "We will bring you no shame, if you allow us to help." For the first time since they had arrived on the hill, Bella's face showed a semblance of calm, though her ever-roaming eyes told a different story. Narcissa caught a flicker of longing in her sister's expression. She understood that Bella had yearned for years to be the one to deliver the Potter boy to the Dark Lord. "You would be ideally positioned," Bella murmured. "You could relay the Order's plans to the Death Eaters. Yes, you could draw Potter into the open. Surely he is the secret keeper? With Potter gone, the entire structure will crumble." "Then give us a way to communicate, Bella," Narcissa urged. "We can't be seen leaving their headquarters to make reports. Perhaps mirrors, like the ones." She hesitated, not wanting to mention Sirius or Andromeda, which might reignite Bella's temper. Andromeda had been close to their cousin in their youth. They had used two-way mirrors to converse over summers. Perhaps it was that private connection that had set them both on the regrettable paths they now walked. After a long moment of contemplation, Bella disapparated. When she reappeared 15 minutes later, she held a pair of small, tarnished mirrors, perhaps even the same ones that Andromeda and Sirius had shared. Finally, Bella flicked her wand, and the ropes binding the Malfoys to the tree vanished. Narcissa's knees buckled beneath her. She inhaled deeply until her ribs ached, then arranged her fine blonde hair over her shoulders, turning her attention to Bella, who held the twin mirrors. Narcissa was not naive about her sister's nature. She knew Bella was ruthless and violent. A woman who had taken many lives in the Dark Lord's service. Yet, before this morning, she would never have imagined her sister capable of turning that violence against their own family, against their sacred blood. Now, she saw that Azkaban had remade Bella, body and mind alike, into something ferociously different. The loyal sister of their youth was still there, but she had undergone a transformation. She was now something entirely new. Her allegiance was to one thing alone. Narcissa understood that if she betrayed Bella in this moment, her sister would stop at nothing. She would kill Draco, then Lucius, and finally, she would take Narcissa's life. This truth resonated deep within her. A chilling certainty about the order in which the deaths would occur. Bellatrix would ensure that each blow inflicted the most pain on Narcissa. The weight of that knowledge seemed to shift the world around her, dulling the brightness of the sun and sky, allowing the winter chill to seep into her very bones. I am the only black sister left, Narcissa thought, feeling a profound distance from the others who had unraveled from their shared tapestry into their own separate realities. Perhaps the old world was already gone, perhaps clinging to it was sheer madness. She felt thin and weary, longing to retreat back into bed, but the thought of Draco kept her posture upright, a habit she had learned to maintain. She would do whatever it took for their survival. With resolve, she extended her hand to her sister, and Bella pressed the mirror into her palm. Narcissa wrapped her fingers around the cold metal, accepting her duty. For a brief moment, neither of them let go. If you betray me, Bella whispered, her voice laced with a chilling intensity. I know, Narcissa replied, steadying herself against the weight of her sister's gaze.